Hello and welcome to Sustainable Old Men. My name is Paul Harvey. I'm a coach and an event host. My person to the right here is Gavin Lendon. Tell us about yourself, Gavin. Who are you? What do you do?
I'm Gavin Lendon. Shockingly, I'm a sustainability consultant with Sustainability UK and a good friend of.
Oh, that's me. Hi, I'm Howard Gunstock. I'm a very good friend of Gavin's, and also not in Europe, not playing football in Europe. But I run a company called Carbon Capture, and we effectively use seaweed to slow down and fight climate change.
And you might
For the
hear more
record,
about
you
that.
might hear carbon capture a few times
You
in this week's
might. You
episode.
might. Not that he plugs it at all, but you might hear that a few
Ever,
times.
ever.
We dropped the good news slot last week. Any ideas? Any good news this week? Any sustainable good news this week that you've seen about?
Did we
Please,
drop?
There has been.
please tell me you
Go
found
on,
something.
go on, Howard.
No, no,
There must be
you
there
first.
must be some good news that may or may not involve carbon capture.
Oh yes.
Well, so maybe I was. I forgot. Do you know what? Yesterday was such a long time ago. It feels like it was such a long time ago. So yeah, there was a little tiny bit of good news that yesterday was World Ocean Day, and the World Economic Forum decided to run with their story that carbon capture was their lead story on World Ocean Day, which was amazing. And I was all over the socials like forever. It felt like I couldn't get off, and that's the addiction of my mobile phone.
Yes. No, but to be
And,
said, what
and
is great about World Ocean Day is it is a very valid thing because it is a real tool that we could use to put right all the wrongs that we've done. I mean, the ocean, it's it is as I think as you pointed out, 2 out of every 3 breaths come out of the ocean, and so to have this day now recognised so strongly, and their plan of 30 by 30, and as in to protect 30% of the world oceans by 2030, I think is a really good plan, and it's seems to be getting some traction.
It does. What doesn't seem to be getting some traction is environmental hypothermia. Is it hypothermia? Yeah, environmental hypothermia is not like that. That a massive amount of heat stress that's happening across our planet at the moment. So protecting our oceans is a fundamental part of being able to make sure that we can reduce some of that heat stress that's happening. And one of the brilliant ways you can do that is growing seaweed. Who knew?
Who knew? No.
Oh, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. I did.
good news is actually bad news, but potentially there's a silver lining, which is the wildfires in Canada have now produced such bad air quality in New York that the Americans now are experiencing climate change firsthand, and not just in California and in the North Pacific Northwest. It's
Yeah.
now coming across the whole country. And despite Marjorie Taylor Greene making the most stupidest comment about it, blaming woke Canada or something for these wildfires, I think potentially the Americans are beginning to wake up.
Well,
I
it was really
apologize to
interesting.
all American listeners in case you are already awake,
It's
but
really interesting to see Joni Kruger, the girl from Killing Eve. She's doing a one-woman show on Broadway, and she basically halfway through her show, she just basically walked off set, so she couldn't breathe properly, and her understudy had to come along and do the rest of the show. So there's actually some real traction happening
tangible.
across, yeah, tangible effects that they're starting to see. It's interesting that New York, which is a city that's famous for its pollution, have such a high tolerance for the smoke and pollution in their city. Because I think when you look at some of the surrounding cities around New York, they won't
That
have such
brings
things.
us really nicely onto our topic today, because apparently most of the Tesla owners, their
Mm.
cars have got HEPA filters on them, and they've been driving around quite
What's a HEPA
successfully.
filter?
It's a very high, it filters the air to a very high concentration. You get it on like vacuum cleaners. So if you've
You
got a lot
do.
of pet hair and that sort of stuff, or dust mites, it takes those things out. So for people with asthmatic problems, you use a HEPA filter Hoover. So Hoover, vacuum cleaner. But Tesla cars have this as standard on their system, so people don't get. They can drive anywhere basically and not get the effects of pollen, but it's filtering the smoke out, so they're getting quite a nice drive in their Tesla.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Which brings us onto the subject of EVs. One of the advantages of an EV, you can drive it in a smoke-filled environment.
Well, you can drive a Tesla. I'm not sure all of the EVs.
Yes.
No, indeed.
Yeah.
But it does bring this point, isn't it? I mean, we touched on this thing about. I mean, I touched on EVs a couple of episodes ago, and you said you're going to get very ranty over it. So if there's an opportunity for Howard to get ranty, we'll probably have to go there, really.
Oh, well,
I do think Rowan Atkinson might have got ranty before Howard.
Rowan Atkinson might have done.
Yes, he was there was an article in the Guardian on Saturday. Just to let people know, we record these in two sets. So if you're catching this a couple of weeks, you're not going to notice there's a time lag. But he was pointing out that he's been disillusioned by EVs, and the fact that it's not that good a sense to change cars so quickly because of the embodied carbon and all the embodied stuff in these things. He's made some fundamental errors in his thinking.
He has. There's a couple. He's also made a couple of interesting points that probably hold a little bit true. So he's not totally wrong. So first off, my main point is electric vehicles aren't here to save the planet. They're here to save the car industry. That's, you're still burning plastics, etc. And I think what we're getting, there's a disconnect between purchasing an electric vehicle and being stuck in the consumerism cycle and actually using the resource. So I think the bit that he's got right is if you've got an ICE, internal combustion engine car, thank you for that yesterday, Paul. If you've got an ICE car, internal combustion engine car, you should, rather than just, I'm going to change it for a Tesla or other electric vehicles are available, rather than do it just on a whim, you should be using that car that you've got to its full life cycle, which isn't 2 or 3 or 5 years when you get bored of that particular model. It's 10, 15, 20, 25 years. That's how long a car should be in its duration. It's designed to run, for a couple of 100,000 miles. At that point, then it is not necessarily fit for purpose, and there has to be a process of making sure that you, I guess, recycle, get the value out of the metal that's been taken out of the earth. It wasn't designed to be like an item of clothing that you replace every 2 or 3 years.
Well, hang on. Let's explore that process a moment. So I have a car which is 2012. My car is so that's a few years old, and I bought it secondhand. I've always bought secondhand cars. I've never bought a new car. Now I know a lot of my friends are in this process of the lease process where you lease the car for 3 years and you return it and you get a new one. So you're constantly paying your $250 a month for your car. So
that's a consumer cycle. That's something set up by the
car industry love that because now what they do is they use the inherent value process, don't they? So they say that they basically sell the car in portions. So the $250 a month covers a certain portion of the value of that car. It then goes off into the second-hand market, and then another portion is covering another portion until obviously the profit value is taken out of the car, and the car no longer has a profit value, but it still has a monetary value. So whoever the last person gets to hold it then ends up completing that cycle that you're talking about in terms of towards the end of its life. Because these don't get destroyed, these cars. They do get used.
No, you're missing a point. You're talking about the value, the book value of the car to the car manufacturer. What you're not talking about is the life cycle of the car, which is different from its financial value.
I agree, but what I'm getting at is that the initial point, isn't it? The car manufacturer will sell the car on that lease process to start with to get their residual value, their initial profit. And it goes down that chain until they've got their profit, then it gets released back into the second-hand car market.
Yeah, you're right. But the only thing that the car industry is, in that sense, is looking for is to make sure that they cover their costs and make profit.
Oh
They
yeah,
don't care.
yeah.
They don't.
It's basically it's a financial vehicle, and the car just happens to be the product that passes through the process. Gavin wants to come in on here, didn't you?
Yeah. I've been sat here quietly.
You have.
nicely.
I've been very impressed actually how you sat.
Well
Wow.
behaved.
No, yeah.
Now, you were talking about the profit in that wonderful inverted commas. The actual true cost of a car, I don't know if this is true for an
Drum roll,
EV.
please.
It's a fraction of what the car is sold for. Because
Correct.
basically what you're purchasing is, if I'm being generous to the car industry, is development and innovation.
Okay.
Really. Howard,
Yeah,
I know you'll have a view on that one.
Yeah, no, 100%. You're right. You're paying for development and the years and years of research and development that gone into developing that car, and effectively some executives' profit. That's what you're paying for, right? And effectively they deem that price, and that's the bit they're trying to get back off. That lease car process is a great vehicle to help reignite the car industry. It's not a great vehicle to save the planet.
Okay, how about turning this back to EVs?
Yeah.
And on that, I'm going to tie it in slightly to make it more of an economic point. And I'm going to mention the Brexit word again, which I know, yes, Howard, I saw that facial expression. 80% of UK cars are exported to the main markets being the EU, US, and China. There's been a survey which came out today. It's in ED, which remind me, Paul. I'll put the link in the chat. Because the other markets trying to comply with their own net zero obligations, they're all developing EV manufacturing facilities themselves. As a consequence, the projection is the UK, because of a lack of support centrally, cost of living, etc., is likely to lose 10.96 billion pounds worth of car sales to the EU by 2030, 1.45 billion to the US, to China, and 0.9 billion to the US. So, frighteningly, the impact of EV economically in the UK is substantial from UK PLC's perspective. Due discussion.
Can I say there's some background noise coming from somewhere?
Yeah, it's mine. I'm going to move into a different room. One sec.
I've never seen this in our podcast before, Paul.
No, I haven't either.
Oh, look at that. It just appeared from underneath. Is it safe to assume he's just moved to the basement?
I've just moved to the library.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know whether you were picking that up, and when you mentioned it, I'm like, okay, cool, let's go to the other part. Okay, so it's really interesting that you're talking about it's going to be damaging to UK PLC, but UK PLC actually isn't UK PLC, is it? I telling you, it's actually Japan PLC. Taiwan PLC, these are just we just have some manufacturing.
Yes and no, but the point about it, what you're missing the point on that is it's about GDP, isn't it? When money passes through the country, it inflates our gross domestic product and makes us look profitable and makes the country look better. So it encourages investment. That's what it's about. Whether the money comes and goes is irrelevant for GDP.
GDP is only possible when you've got a growing population.
Well, we're veering into other conversations here.
Yes,
We
I was
are.
going to say,
Let's stick onto the car thing.
Okay,
yeah,
so they are interconnected, aren't they? You can't just take the conversation in isolation. The electric vehicle market is going to, is going to be sorry, going back to the original question, the original statement from Rowan Atkinson's rant. There is some merit in what he said, but I think he's got some of the things wildly out of context. I absolutely, in the terms of in the disposable marketplace, where basically we have a throwaway culture, then going from a car to an electric vehicle is bad.
Well,
If you
yes, and still an electric vehicle, assuming it's being fueled by renewable energy,
But that's the
is
point. There's no infrastructure to be able to do that. The infrastructure to be able to do that on the scale that we need is not there. Absolutely, we're going to be transitioning towards an electric vehicle market regardless. But if we do it in a more sustainable way, as in, I'm going to wait until my car really is at the end of its life. That feels like that's a smarter move than saying, oh, I've just got finished with my lease car for 2 years. I'm going to go and buy a Tesla.
But will you be able to do that? Depends where you live. So, I mean, I don't know if but in the
How much money you earn.
Well, yes, but in the major, all right. So, Inverness is probably fine, but I live in Scotland. So Aberdeen and Dundee are both putting in controlled zones where you can take a car. So, now it doesn't affect me, but if you live in those cities, you're not going to be able to have an ICE car without paying through the nose for it in some of those cities.
That's been happening. That's the thing to do with pollution that you were talking about. They have quite a lot of this in London, right? So low
emission zones,
low emission zones, yeah, right. And he's going to make basically pretty much the whole of London low emission zone. It's going to absolutely penalise and cripple the poorer people in our society. But really, that's really the effects of climate change as a standard. The people who are going to be most affected are the people who can least afford it.
slight caveat to that statement.
Ooh,
As a
good.
function of the ULEZ, the air quality in London has improved significantly.
Unquestionably.
And again, low-income houses and low-income populations have been the beneficiaries of that. So the incidence of asthma and breathing-related illnesses has improved. Yeah.
There's a balance, right? So when the UK had, when London had smog and they decided to stop cars, etc. There's several iterations of taking out, of removing lead from petrol, etc.
Yeah.
Sadiq Khan's idea is great. I think his execution has been quite discriminatory, to the people who are most affected. So there needs to be, and he's put in a system where you can swap your diesel vehicle for electric vehicle. But realistically, the people that can afford those electric vehicles are suffering currently from massively skyrocketing mortgage rates and massively increasing rental prices and a food shortage. All of these things as a combined situation. Yes, they can breathe better, unquestionably. That's a huge benefit. There needed to be much more support and thinking of the economic situations, because the numbers of people that will be benefiting from this clean air is dwindling due to the population growth.
I'd make a few points.
Cool.
One of the points I totally agree with you on is in terms of infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, do you travel much on motorways?
No, not really, actually, because I live in the country.
Okay, if you did, and Howard probably knows this, if you go into a service area and there's a Tesla facility that is exclusive for Teslas, which is high-speed charging, they can charge their cars in 20, 30 minutes or so. Really, really impressive. But Tesla have invested in their own infrastructure. The rest of the other manufacturers are dependent on government infrastructure, which is lacking. It's building up from the southeast outwardly, because as Howard is kind of implying, EVs at the moment, because of their pricing, are affordable by, I don't know, the top third of the population, probably even less. So using Howard's point in particular, and you touched on Aberdeen and Dundee, London, high-rise accommodation, where are you going to put all the EVs that are in car parks? We're already in a situation where the car industry is saying the car parks were originally built in the 60s and 70s can no longer support the weight of EVs.
No, that's
EVs.
that's rubbish.
Triggered. You're triggered. You're triggered by this statement. You came up with this the other day.
That's rubbish. Surely, an EV can't be heavier than a nice car.
Ooh.
Well, I think
you're wrong
they
there,
are.
Paul.
I think you're wrong.
I'm
as
really
well,
challenged that because I can't even.
I'm going to Google discreetly whilst you carry on.
No,
Yeah,
no,
Give me.
I think Gavin's
we'll go
right.
for a Tesla. We'll go for a Tesla versus. Give me a nice
Mercedes.
car.
Mercedes.
A Mercedes, right? Crack on. I'll be 30 seconds given my speed of typing.
What are you going to do in 30 seconds?
You're
How are you going to do the other 15?
You're going to talk to.
Ouch.
So, yeah,
I mean, the point about it is, isn't it? I mean, there are so many factors in this car conversation, and I think you could pull on any one of those strings and make an argument in either
absolutely.
direction. I mean, you could talk about lithium batteries being a major issue, and you know, the fact that where lithium comes from, and there's a whole supply chain on this thing. But then you can do the same with like, you know, we ravage the earth for centuries looking for coal, so it's just another iteration of something else. And the lithium boys do know it's a problem, and they do know the world's watching, so they're all actually much more acutely aware where they're heading with this, and there's all sorts of new processes coming out all the time to improve their situation.
It's really interesting. It's a backhanded conversation I had with a friend of mine who works fairly high up in Tesla. Told me that one of the reasons why Musk is doing so much work with his space exploration is that he wants to get permission from the American government, who pretty much funded Tesla in his early part of his tenure as CEO at Tesla. They basically gave him all the grants in the world that they could possibly do to keep the company afloat. But the reason why he's doing all this his SpaceX work is so he has first dibs on any asteroid mining. So that's a real conversation.
Well, it is, but the point
Is
about
that right?
but, I mean, that's
Yeah.
another. I mean, you could go there at some other stage, but you know, asteroid mining would be incredibly difficult, expensive, but it would work if you were producing things in space. But just imagine if someone found a gold asteroid, it would completely screw up the economy of Earth, wouldn't it?
Well, that's the thing about precious and money. It's based on faith. It's based on you know, there's a finite resource. There was a conversation that we talked about money in an African country that the time their currency was little glass beads, and the English basically came over in boats, but filled with little glass beads, and they destroyed the economy of the country. So there's lots of little things that are built on trust and stories, which effectively that asteroid mining will do. The other one is diamonds, right? So there's a very high chance of there being diamonds on an asteroid.
The diamond industry is already collapsed, and it's interesting. It was always a house of cards anyway, because De Beers controlled it. So that's how they made diamonds valuable. But,
do you know I met the grandchildren of the De Beers when I was 19 on holiday?
Oh, I didn't know that. I know. I met someone who was heavily involved in the diamond industry, and he said, like, it's gone, finished.
Oh, wow.
You know?
How's your Googling going? Are you onto something else now? Are you cooking breakfast?
No, I am basically just doing a relative percentage. Well, actually, I'm not going to bother with that. Technical victory for Gav and Howard over Paul. But
yes!
It's not significant.
No, I didn't think it was.
Mercedes, I think I did C-Class, 1,849 kilograms curb weight. Sorry, that was the Tesla. Tesla's 1,849. C class is 1,615.
Is
So
that
it's
with
200
fuel? Is that with fuel or without?
That would be without fuel.
So you put the fuel,
Yes.
you put the 80 liters of fuel this thing might take, and suddenly you start stuck in another 80 kilograms on top of that.
That is a fair point.
It is a very good point. Nonetheless, not every car is a Mercedes C-Class, and most of them are probably Volkswagens and
Ford Fiestas.
Ford Fiestas, etc. And I guarantee those companies are maximizing their profit margins, so they're putting less weight and less quality into said car, but making it certainly wider, which is another thing that gets my goat.
The SUV thing is a bit ridiculous. This to when we should be looking at, making bigger and bigger, wider cars is crazy.
So, in terms of
car obesity, they call it.
Oh, nice. In terms of what are the impacts of EV compared to ICE cars, Rowan Atkinson's made his points about the design, the useful life, which Howard's already touched upon. In terms of an EV, if you take it from extraction of the materials all the way through to end of life, it is proven to be less emitting.
Correct.
But that does go back to Howard's point. That is over the full useful life. The batteries, Rowan Atkinson made some points about the battery life. But the new lithium-ion batteries, based on the second article that we looked at, actually last for the duration of the full useful life.
Easily last the duration of longer, and they will last longer than an ICE car. If an ICE car does 300,000 miles tops,
max.
They reckon that a Tesla will do nearly 1 million miles. This battery and the battery will last all of it.
I was going to say, no one's tested that yet.
No, but that's what they've worked out. I don't know how they worked it out. I guess they put it through age testing factors to see if it would do that.
Okay, so right. So in terms of the emissions, a win for the EV.
Yeah.
What are the other effects? We talked about the socio-economic effects in the sense of EVs can be afforded, though the better EVs, like the better ICE cars, can only be afforded by that section of society. And Howard's mentioned a low-income family living in London, let's say on the 16th floor of a flat. Do they have access to a specific car parking space? No. High-rise flats in London don't come with one car parking space per flat.
No, that's a battle.
Exactly. So,
but they also have an underground system. There's an underground system and a public transport system. But the other thing that comes into this debate is it's not just about the car, is it? It's about the usage of said car. And I'm not talking about the life cycle of it. I'm talking about how many people get in a car. It goes to your point a couple of weeks ago about the amount of time you spend in the car. I think it's 1% of its actual life. And most of the time, it's one person that sits in a 4-seater car that's getting fatter and fatter and fatter. Sorry, that's another gripe. That's that gripe again. But it's one person. Yeah. If you're filling a car effectively, that's going to be slightly better for the environment than filling it with just one person. Right? And I'm just as guilty as that, right?
I do notice when I go. When I used to go abroad, I haven't been abroad for a long time. But what I noticed when you get into a taxi, like in Greece and those sort of places at the station, you always share the taxi. You never get in it on your own. You get in and they sell the other seats next to you.
Yeah. But
we don't do that in this country. We all get in a taxi on our own.
Yeah, it's a really good point about, I'm going that way. I think the tuk-tuks over in Asia, not the tuk-tuks, but on the islands, they're these trucks with seats either side. You sit and they fill it up, right? They fill up those spaces. That's to do with the maximizing of profits. And that's really interesting that in a country like the UK, which is all about maximizing profits, that one aspect we don't actually use. We don't actually do.
No, when you buy a taxi, you assume you buy all the space, don't you? Yeah. You don't assume the space is shared.
So in terms of the second article that the Guardian produced, which was the response to Rowan Atkinson's point. On the emissions discussion that we've touched on, just to wheel out the facts, the second article produced all the alternative facts, depending on your view. Over the full life of the vehicle, the EV reduced emissions by 2/3. Rowan Atkinson started suggesting that other alternatives were available, including hydrogen.
That's a rant I want to get on at some stage, but not this one.
Yeah.
And hydrogen reduced the emissions by 39%. Now,
I'd love to see those figures, because I can't believe it's true.
But the problem with all this comes back to what Howard's talking about, which is they all need infrastructure. And now, as a kid, my dad owned a petrol station and a garage, which is absolutely fine. At the time, fuel miles per gallon, that kind of thing, was pretty low. So our town in Minehead, of a population of 10,000, had something like 6 garages. By the time I'd graduated, it was down to 2 garages, because fuel consumption and fuel efficiency was so much better. People weren't filling up cars as much. So that kind of removed the infrastructure. Even now, you see garages disappearing all the time, a bit like pubs. Another discussion for another day.
So that is a good idea, discussion.
Yeah. Thanks, Howard. What I'm driving towards is there is no infrastructure at this time for EVs that covers the country. Scotland, per kilometre, has the highest number of EV points. But I think that there's parts of the country that are basically barren.
And Scotland will be a problem because of you say there's a lot of points, but certainly in the Highlands where I live, there's a.
I was going to say, totally focused on the valley. The problem with that, and this is combining the point with Howard's point, which is we only use the car. I think it's 6% of the time. The rest of the time, it's sat somewhere, and we only do journeys of 40 miles or less. But the challenge for EV is range anxiety. People are scared of running out of power because there's a lack of infrastructure. And so people have got into their mindset, God, what's the range? It's 280 miles. Well, that's not enough, because an ICE can do 400, 500. But we never use it.
In all honesty, right? Okay, I don't think I drive a tremendous amount, right? But I do have to travel reasonably long distances, 40, 50, 60 miles sometimes, right? I fill up my tank. When was the last time, right, and I can't even remember it, that I filled up my tank, went for a drive, and then needed to fill up my tank again in the same day?
Exactly.
Right? It just doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen to anybody. Unless you're a long-distance lorry driver or delivery driver, right? Which the vast majority of this population aren't. So this range anxiety is a thing that, a bit like that the car industry have created to create a problem to keep people on ICE vehicles.
Exactly.
And I want to pick up on one thing that you said at the beginning about EVs are there to save the car industry. In some way, yes, but in some way, no, because there was a thing that came out a couple of years ago called Carmageddon. And it was what happens when all the ICE engines are turned off and you only have electric cars. And it's the difference in parts. An electric car has just under 500 parts in it. An ICE car has over 3,000. And there's a huge industry around making all those parts. So you're going to have a massive contraction in this industry. You're not going to need all of the bits and pieces that you need in an ICE car. Now,
whoa. Hang on a minute. What you're just describing to me,
yep,
right, is still a way of saving the car industry. It's just like when I used to work in multinational business organizations, and they would have organizational change, restructuring, right? And you have to make a load of people redundant because what's happened is that business has grown organically, and they've got too many people to fill up the action, right? And what you've done is you've just trimmed down the supply chain. Still saves the car industry. It doesn't affect Honda, the Honda dealership. It will affect or the Ford dealerships. It affects the suppliers, but the industry still survives.
It will affect the dealerships as well because there's less servicing on those cars. There's less things go wrong. It will affect all the garages that you know and people.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point.
MOT stations. It will affect all these people that have to do, that get a sizable chunk of work every week from doing these things.
Yeah,
these cars won't need anywhere near the level of attention that the other cars get. They're going to need software engineers, lots of them.
Yeah,
a couple of points which are kind of distractions based on what you just talked about. One of the great advantages of EVs, which is why they are so much more efficient, coming back to you talking about number of components, etc., is the ratio of power to the wheels is so much higher on an EV compared to ICE.
That's a really good point.
Secondly, talking about your point about servicing, and this is a conversation with my local garage. So this is like Uncle Bill said. So I flag up this is hearsay. An electrician servicing your house has to be registered, has to go through various qualifications. Absolutely. A Tesla or an EV pulling into a garage can be serviced by a mechanic with no electrical qualifications, and the amount of power that is going through the vehicle completely dwarfs the amount of power going through a house. It's amazing. That I suspect will be addressed over time. Okay, rant over.
I had heard somewhere they actually have in some of these garages they have a body clamp, so that if someone touches the battery in the wrong place, they can get them off the battery. Because if you touch the battery, if you touch the battery in the wrong place, it will grip you, and anyone touching the body would get got. So you have to pull the body off the battery. It may be an urban myth, I don't know, but I had heard it exists.
No,
dear viewers, I'd like to caveat the fact that we are now out of our comfort zone and talking utter crap. But there we go.
But it's one of those urban myths about it. Like things. I mean, it's true. A DC holds you and AC throws you, or it's the other something.
Yeah.
Where do you get all this?
My father's an electrical engineer, so I used to hear about it when I was a child.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
Why didn't you take after him?
I do.
He's bald. He's bald.
Ouch.
No, but there's a thing. When someone you hit them with a baseball bat to get them off electric charge. I'm sure there's something similar at Tesla.
Is that Elon Musk's management style?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
But I mean,
we haven't mentioned carbon capture for a while.
Clearly, look, if we, there are a couple of things. There's also AI, which we'll talk for another day. AI, because AI will come into this industry, into cars.
AI is already in this industry.
No, but it will come into cars, and self-driving cars will happen, and then there'll be a whole other conversation. But not for today.
Can I just send you a quick interesting fact, right? That I learned the other day. You know, when you go onto a computer a website and they give you that grid and say that I'm not a robot, right? And then they ask you to identify traffic lights and bicycles and zebra crossings.
Yeah.
I learned the other day that is Google sell that software. The results of that software of billions of people doing tests and selling them of different quality pictures of lights, etc., and all that sort of stuff. They sell it to the electric vehicle industry so they can automate automatic cars. So you've got millions of people validating that blurry thing is as a bicycle, and that blurry thing is a traffic lights, and that's how they sell that data. We've been doing UAT and free software integration for that industry for decades.
Paul, another point about AI and cars. There is an absolutely classic short video doing rounds on YouTube or TikTok or something. And it's a picture of, I think it's an American highway patrolman trying to pull over a self-driving car, and the passengers basically sitting in the back, and the guy's going, and the guy in the back's going.
But over,
I don't think he's supposed to be sitting in the back, though, is he? He's supposed to be sitting.
I think he's meant to be in the front.
He's meant to be by the wheel to take over, so that's why he's being
absolutely. But it's a great video because it just demonstrates AI's limitations.
Yeah.
For now.
Anyway, I think we'll come on to AI another day, because I think AI is a great topic on its own. I don't want to dilute where we are really on today.
Do you want to carry on with this, or do you want to summarize?
I think we should summarize.
Actually, Howard is our summarizer.
No, I think Paul should do it today.
I think I should summarize today. Well, I mean, look, obviously moving to an EV is. I would quite like an EV, I must admit. But why do I want one? I mean, I guess part of that is that whole thing about, like, you know, it would be nice to drive a car which I know is not damaging the environment. But I don't use a car very often. I have a car here, and the last time I drove it was Sunday, and well, today is Friday. So that gives you how much cars I use. But I do appreciate people do need to use a car, and if we're going to make a difference in this world, particularly from a climate change perspective, we're going to have better public transport. Now, I can't sum this up, guys, that well. I don't know where I'm going with it, really.
I think you need to touch on Howard's point about the fact, and we're driving back towards car sharing and your point about taxes in Greece. Howard's point of people drive a car that can sit 5, but they tend to be on their own. That's an inefficient use of the vehicle. How do you solve that? I don't know. There is a car sharing website called CarShare, KAR Share, which I think on the last podcast someone added it to the comments on LinkedIn. So well worth checking them out. I think, again, some of the points that Howard made, if he wants to touch on them again, are pretty critical about infrastructure, how we are using transport as a whole. We're talking about cars generically. I think Howard's made the point about we need to think about it in terms of transport getting from A to B. How do you do that?
But I guess your car is an extension of yourself, isn't it? When you buy a car, and I know it was when I was younger. When I got my first car, it was an extension of me, and you put your things in it to make it like your car. So I think
I've got an awful image that you drove a Ford Capri. I'm just
no, I didn't actually. I can't remember. I did have a Ford Escort for a while.
Howard, Howard, he's not telling the truth. I know it's a Hillman Imp. I know it's a Hillman Imp. Gosh, yeah. Or a Citroen 2CV. That would be brilliant.
Citroen 2CV, I can see that.
I can safely say to you, my brother was a car dealer at the time, so I had a succession of different old bangers that passed through my hands on a constant basis.
Sorry, you're talking about cars, right?
I was going to say, have we moved off topic here? And on that point, we should end.
Yes, for sure.
So a final note for this, really. Yes, I mean, we are in a transition point between ICE vehicles and EVs, and it's going to be it's going to take a while for them to permeate through to the lower ends of society who can afford them. But someone will come in with a very cheap EV at some point, I'm sure. The bigger.
That's on that note,
that's on your fire.
That's a positive note to end it on, wasn't it?